The last words her mama whispered weren't about love or forgiveness. They were about survival, about a name, about finding a man who owned half the valley and asking him one specific question. Vera Hollis had spent 3 years trying to understand what it meant. 3 years scraping by in a town that had long since forgotten her family existed. But when she finally stood face to face with Jackson Kincaid, the wealthiest rancher in Montana Territory, and spoke those words aloud, his face went white as winter frost. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The wind came down from the mountains like a punishment, dry and relentless, scraping across the flats where Ashton Flats squatted in the dust. It was the kind of town that had been born hopeful and died disappointed, the kind where buildings leaned into each other for support, and the only thing that thrived was regret. Vera Hollis lived in a converted grain shed at the far edge of town, where even the beggars didn't bother to walk. The roof leaked in 3 places. She'd patched 2 with tar paper and old flour sacks. Third, she just moved her cot. She was 28 years old and looked 40. Not from hardship alone, though there'd been plenty of that, but from the particular kind of exhaustion that comes from being invisible. Her hands were rope-burned and scarred from hauling water. Her shoulders were broad from splitting wood she couldn't afford to buy. Her hair, once dark and thick, was now streaked with premature grey, and usually tied back with whatever scrap of cloth she could find. She didn't own a mirror, didn't need one. She knew what she looked like. The town had made sure of that. Every morning she woke before dawn and walked the 1.5 miles to the boarding house on Sycamore Street, where she scrubbed floors, emptied chamber pots, and washed linens until her knuckles bled. Mrs. Garrett, the owner, paid her in day-old bread and 50 cents a week. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. But it kept her from starving, and in Ashton Flats, that was something. After the boarding house, she'd walk to the dry goods store and sweep the floors for Mr. Pittman, a sour-faced man who smelled like tobacco and talked to her only to complain. He paid her in credit, which meant she could buy beans, lard, and occasionally a bit of salted pork. Once, he'd offered her a job behind the counter. She'd been excited until she realized what he really wanted. She quit that same afternoon and never spoke of it again. Her father had been a trapper, her mother a laundress. They'd lived modestly but with dignity, a small house on the north side of town with a garden that produced tomatoes, squash, and hope. Vera had been raised on stories of her grandmother, a Cheyenne woman who'd married a French trapper and lived in the hills, free and wild. Her mama used to say, Vera had her grandmother's eyes, dark and full of old knowing. Vera didn't know what that meant, but she liked the sound of it. Then came the fever. It swept through Ashton Flats like a scythe through wheat, taking the old, the young, and the unlucky. Her father died first, shaking and delirious, calling out for someone named Annabelle. Her mother lasted another week, fading slowly, her hand clutching Vera's with a grip that wouldn't let go. On the last night, when the lamp oil had run out and the room was dark as a grave, her mama pulled her close. "Find Jackson Kincaid," she'd whispered, her breath rattling. "Tell him Lorraine sent you. Tell him your grandmother's name was Laughing Crow. Ask him what he owes." Vera had begged her to explain, but her mama's eyes had already gone distant, fixed on something beyond the ceiling, beyond the world. She died before sunrise, and Vera buried her beside her father in the town cemetery, marked with a wooden cross she'd carved herself. The house was sold for debts, the garden ploughed under, and Vera, with nothing but a tin of her mama's hairpins and a name she didn't understand, had been cast adrift. For 3 years, she'd carried those words like stones in her pockets. Jackson Kincaid. Everyone knew the name. He owned the biggest ranch in the territory, thousands of acres stretching from the river to the mountain range, cattle by the hundreds, horses that fetched top dollar in Denver and Cheyenne. He lived in a sprawling ranch house with white columns and a wraparound porch, the kind of place Vera had only seen from a distance, shimmering like a mirage. He came into town once a month, riding a black stallion, flanked by ranch hands who looked at the rest of the world like it was beneath them. Vera had seen him twice. Once, outside the land office, where he'd been signing papers and laughing with the mayor. She'd been hauling a bucket of wash water and had stopped to watch, her arms aching, sweat running down her back. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair going silver at the temples and a jawline that looked carved from granite. The second time, she'd been sweeping the steps of the general store when he'd ridden past, not 10 feet away. She'd opened her mouth to speak, but the words had died in her throat. Who was she to approach a man like that? What would she even say? So she'd stayed silent, and the years had bled into each other, one indistinguishable from the next. She worked, she survived. She tried not to think about the fact that she had no future, no prospects, no way out. The women in town avoided her, not out of cruelty but out of discomfort. She was a reminder of what could happen, how far someone could fall. The men either ignored her or looked at her with a mixture of pity and proposition, as if poverty made her available. There had been one man, once. His name was Thomas Briggs, a clerk at the bank with soft hands and kind eyes. He'd spoken to her at the church social, offered her a glass of punch, asked her about her family. For a few weeks, she'd let herself believe something might happen. Then his mother found out. She'd cornered Vera outside the post office, her face pinched with disgust. "My son will not be seen with a woman of your station," she'd hissed. "You have no family, no dowry, no prospects. If you pursue him, I will make sure every door in this town closes to you." Vera nodded, said nothing, and walked away. Thomas never spoke to her again. She saw him a year later, married to the daughter of a cattle broker, pushing a baby carriage down Main Street. He didn't look at her. She didn't blame him. She'd given up on dreams by then. Dreams were for people who had something to lose. Vera had nothing, which meant she also had nothing to protect, nothing to hope for. She woke up. She worked. She ate when she could. She slept when exhaustion finally dragged her under. It was a kind of death, slow and suffocating, but it was hers. Her shed had one window, facing east. On clear mornings she could see the mountains, purple and distant, like something from a painting. She used to imagine what lay beyond them, other towns, other lives, places where no one knew her name or her shame. But imagining took energy, and energy was a luxury she couldn't afford. She had one possession she treasured, a small leather-bound journal her father had given her when she was 12. He'd taught her to read and write, unusual for a trapper, but he'd been educated back east before heading to the frontier. The journal was mostly empty now. She'd filled the first few pages with pressed flowers, sketches of birds, lines of poetry she'd copied from a book at the church. The rest was blank, waiting for a life that never came. In the morning everything changed. Vera woke to the sound of rain hammering the tin roof. It was late September, the air sharp with the promise of winter. She dressed in the dark, pulling on the same threadbare dress she wore every day, the hem patched so many times it looked like a quilt. Her boots had holes in the soles. She stuffed them with newspaper. The walk to the boarding house was miserable. Mud sucked at her feet. Rain soaked through her shawl. By the time she arrived, she was shivering, her teeth chattering. "Missus." Garrett took one look at her and shook her head. "You looked like a drowned rat," she said, not unkindly. "Go warm yourself by the stove before you catch your death." Vera nodded, too cold to speak. She stood by the stove in the kitchen, holding her hands over the heat, watching steam rise from her clothes. One of the other girls, a young thing named Lily with blonde curls and a quick smile, brought her a cup of weak coffee. "Heard there's a big to-do at the Kincaid Ranch tonight," Lily said, settling onto a stool. "Some kind of party. They brought in musicians from Denver, ordered food from the hotel. Must be nice to have money like that." Vera said nothing, just sipped the coffee, letting the warmth spread through her chest. Jackson Kincaid. The name always circled back, like a hawk over carrion. "Why don't you ever talk?" Lily asked, not meanly, just curious. "You're always so quiet." "Nothing to say," Vera replied. Lily shrugged. "I'd go mad if I didn't talk. Silence makes me nervous." "Silence makes me safe," Vera thought, but didn't say. She worked through the day, scrubbing, hauling, mending. Her mind, as always, wandered to her mama's last words. "Find Jackson Kincaid. Tell him Lorraine sent you. Tell him your grandmother's name was Laughing Crow. Ask him what he owes." She'd turned those words over 1,000 times, trying to unlock their meaning. Was it a debt? A secret? A promise? And why would a man like Kincaid care about a dead laundress and a Cheyenne woman who'd been gone for decades? By late afternoon, the rain had stopped. Vera finished her work and stepped outside, breathing in the clean, wet air. The town looked almost beautiful in the golden light, the mud glistening, the buildings softened by shadow. She stood there for a moment, feeling something she couldn't name, a restlessness, a stirring. Then she saw him. Jackson Kincaid rode down Main Street like he owned it, which in a sense he did. His black stallion moved with grace and power, hooves striking the wet ground with authority. He wore a long coat, dark and expensive, his hat tilted just enough to shadow his eyes. Behind him, 3 ranch hands followed, armed and watchful. Vera's heart kicked hard against her ribs. She didn't think, she just moved. "Mr. Kincaid," she called out, stepping into the street. He pulled the reins. The stallion stopped, tossing its head. Kincaid looked down at her, his expression unreadable. Up close, he was even more imposing, his face weathered but handsome, his eyes a startling shade of grey. He said nothing, waiting. Vera swallowed. Her mouth was dry. Her hands trembled. "My name is Vera Hollis," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "My mama was Lorraine. Before she died, she told me to find you. She told me to tell you my grandmother's name was Laughing Crow. She told me to ask you what you owe." The effect was immediate. Kincaid's face went pale, his jaw tightened. The ranch hands exchanged glances, uneasy. For a long moment no one moved, no one spoke. The only sound was the drip of water from the eaves and the restless shifting of the horses. "What else?" Kincaid said finally, his voice low and dangerous. "Did your mama say?" Kincaid dismounted in one fluid motion, his boots hitting the mud with a wet thud. He stood a full head taller than Vera, his grey eyes searching her face with an intensity that made her want to step back. But she held her ground, chin lifted, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. "She told me you'd know what it meant," Vera said, her voice steadier now. "She told me to come find you when I was ready, when I had nothing left to lose." The ranch hands shifted in their saddles. One of them, a lean man with a scar across his cheek, leaned forward. "Boss, you want us to go back to the ranch," Kincaid said without looking at him. "All of you. But Mr. Kincaid now." The authority in his voice left no room for argument. The men exchanged glances, then turned their horses and rode off, leaving only the fading sound of hooves on wet ground. Kincaid turned back to Vera, his expression unreadable. "Walk with me," he said. It wasn't a question. He started down the street toward the edge of town, his long stride eating up the distance. Vera hesitated for only a moment before following, her worn boots squelching in the mud. People watched from windows and doorways, their faces pressed against glass, mouths moving behind closed doors. By tomorrow, the whole town would be talking. She didn't care. She'd stopped caring about what Ashton Flats thought of her a long time ago. They walked in silence until they reached the old mill at the edge of town, long abandoned, its wheel frozen and covered in moss. Kincaid stopped there, leaning against the weathered wood, his arms crossed. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across his face, deepening the lines around his eyes and mouth. "Laughing Crow," he said finally, as if testing the weight of the name. "I haven't heard that name in 30 years. "She was my grandmother," Vera said. "My mama's mother. I know who she was." "Then you know why I'm here." Kincaid's jaw worked. He looked away, out toward the mountains, his expression distant. "I knew Lorraine," he said quietly. "Not well, but I knew her. She worked for my family when I was young, before I took over the ranch. She was a good woman, proud, didn't take charity from anyone." Vera waited, her throat tight. "Laughing Crow was different," Kincaid continued. "She was Cheyenne, married to a French trapper named Baptiste Moreau. They lived in the high country, traded furs and horses. My father did business with them for years. Baptiste was honest, which was rare in those days. When he died, Laughing Crow stayed in the hills, refused to come down, even when things got hard." "What does any of this have to do with my mother?" Vera asked. "What does it have to do with me?" Kincaid's eyes met hers, and for the first time she saw something crack in his composure. "Guilt, maybe. Or shame. Your grandmother saved my life," he said. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and strange. Vera blinked, trying to make sense of it. "When I was 17, Kincaid continued, "I got separated from a hunting party up near Crow's Peak. It was winter, middle of January. A storm rolled in fast, the kind that turns the world white in minutes. I had no supplies, no horse. I was sure I was going to die out there. But Laughing Crow found me. She brought me to her cabin, kept me alive for 3 days until the storm passed. Fed me, kept the fire going, didn't ask for anything in return." Vera frowned. "That still doesn't explain." "When I got home," Kincaid interrupted, "and I told my father what happened. I wanted to repay her, to send her food, blankets, money. But my father refused. He said the Cheyenne didn't need our charity, that it would be an insult to offer. I was young. I believed him. I never went back." "So you owe her a debt," Vera said. "More than that." Kincaid's voice dropped. 2 years later, there was a fire. Laughing Crow's cabin burned to the ground. She survived, but barely. She had nothing left. She came down from the hills and tried to get help. My father turned her away. Vera's hands clenched into fists. Why? Because she was Cheyenne. Because people were scared after the wars, even though she'd never raised a hand against anyone. Because my father was a coward who cared more about appearances than honor. And you let him. I was 19, Kincaid said, his voice tight. I didn't have a say. I didn't have control of the ranch yet. But that's no excuse. I should have done something. I should have stood up to him. What happened to her? She died that winter. Pneumonia. Your mother was with her at the end. Lorraine was just a girl then, maybe 13, but she stayed by her mother's side. After Laughing Crow died, Lorraine worked wherever she could, scrubbing floors, washing clothes. She never asked me for anything, never even looked at me when I passed her on the street. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Because she knew, Vera said bitterly. She knew you owed us, and you never paid. Kincaid's face hardened. You're right. I owed your grandmother my life. I owed your mother an apology, at the very least. And I gave them nothing. Vera turned away, her emotions churning. She'd expected denial, maybe anger. She hadn't expected this raw, unvarnished confession. It made everything more complicated. Why didn't my mother come to you herself? Vera asked. Why wait until she was dying to send me? Kincaid shook his head. Pride, maybe, or shame. Or maybe she knew I wouldn't be able to refuse you. Vera laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. Refuse me? You don't owe me anything. The debt was to them, and they're gone. That's not how debts work, Kincaid said. Not the kind that matter. He straightened, pulling something from his coat pocket. It was a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. He handed it to Vera. She unfolded it carefully. It was a deed, written in careful script, dated 29 years earlier. The land described was a small parcel near the river, 40 acres with water rights. That belonged to Baptiste Moreau, Kincaid said, your great-grandfather. When he died, it should have passed to Laughing Crow, then to Lorraine, then to you. But the county claimed it for unpaid taxes. My father bought it at auction for next to nothing. Vera stared at the paper, her hands trembling. This is mine? It should have been. Kincaid's voice was quiet. I'm giving it back. I don't want your charity. It's not charity. It's what's owed. Vera looked up at him, searching his face for deception, for mockery, for anything that would confirm what she already believed about men like him. But all she saw was weariness and something that might have been regret. Why now? She asked. Why not 10 years ago? Why not when my mother was still alive? Because I'm a coward, Kincaid said simply. Because I told myself it didn't matter, that it was ancient history. Because it was easier to pretend I didn't owe anyone anything. But your mother made sure I couldn't forget. She sent me a letter 2 weeks before she died. He pulled another piece of paper from his pocket, this one more recent, the edges crisp. He handed it to Vera. She recognized her mother's handwriting immediately, the careful loops and slants. Mr. Kincaid, I don't have long. The fever's got me, and I won't see spring. I'm writing to ask one thing. My daughter Vera has nothing. No family, no prospects, no hope. When I'm gone, she'll be alone in a world that's already forgotten her. You owed my mother a debt. You owe me one too. I'm not asking you to marry her or adopt her or save her. I'm asking you to give her a chance. Give her the land that was stolen from us. Let her decide what to do with it. If she comes to you and speaks my name, you'll know she's ready. If she doesn't, let her be. But don't turn her away the way your father turned away my mother. Lorraine Hollis, Vera's eyes burned. She folded the letter carefully and handed it back. She never told me about this, Vera said. She probably didn't want you to feel obligated. And the land? What am I supposed to do with 40 acres and water rights? Kincaid smiled faintly. Whatever you want, farm it, sell it, build a house, it's yours. Vera looked down at the deed in her hands. 40 acres. It wasn't a fortune, it wasn't even a ranch, but it was more than she'd ever had, more than she'd ever dreamed of having. I don't know anything about farming, she said. Neither did I when I started. Kincaid's tone softened. But I can teach you, if you want. Or I can help you find someone who can. The land's good. It borders my property on the north side near Willow Creek. There's timber, grazing land, and the creek runs year-round. Why are you being kind to me? Vera asked, her voice breaking slightly. You don't know me. I'm nobody. You're Laughing Crow's granddaughter, Kincaid said. That makes you somebody. For the first time in years, Vera felt something shift inside her, a crack in the armor she'd built around herself. It wasn't hope, not yet, but it was something close. I need time to think, she said. Take all the time you need. The land's not going anywhere. He turned to leave, then stopped. There's one more thing. Tomorrow night, I'm hosting a gathering at the ranch. Ranchers, bankers, businessmen from 3 counties. It's a business affair, mostly, but there'll be food and music. You should come. Vera stared at him. Are you joking? Not even a little. I don't belong at a place like that. Neither did I when I was your age. Kincaid's grey eyes held hers. But I learned. And you will too. People will talk. People are already talking. Let them. He tipped his hat and walked away, leaving Vera standing alone by the old mill, the deed clutched in her hands. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. She looked down at the paper, at the careful script, at the promise of something she'd never dared to imagine. 40 acres. A chance. She walked back to her shed in a daze, her mind spinning. The town was quiet now. Most people were inside for supper. She slipped through the shadows, avoiding the main streets, and reached her small home just as full dark fell. Inside, she lit her single candle and sat on the edge of her cot, staring at the deed. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. If she comes to you and speaks my name, you'll know she's ready. Ready for what? Vera wondered. Ready to stop being invisible? Ready to claim something that had been stolen? Ready to believe she deserved more than scraps and silence? She thought of Jackson Kincaid, the way he'd looked at her, not with pity or condescension, but with something else. Respect, maybe. Or recognition. As if he saw past the threadbare dress and the scarred hands and the grey streaks in her hair. As if he saw the woman she might have been, if life had been kinder. She didn't trust it. Not yet. Men like Kincaid didn't hand out land and invitations without strings attached. There had to be a catch, some hidden price she'd pay later. But even as doubt crept in, another voice whispered in the back of her mind. What if he means it? What if this is real? Vera lay back on the cot, exhausted but unable to sleep. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the loose boards of the shed. She closed her eyes and tried to imagine what 40 acres looked like, what it would feel like to stand on land that belonged to her, to plant seeds in soil she owned, to build something permanent. The image wouldn't come. Her mind was too scarred, too trained in disappointment. But somewhere deep inside, beneath layers of bitterness and resignation, a tiny spark flickered. Not hope. Not yet, but the memory of what hope used to feel like. The next morning, Vera woke before dawn, as always. She dressed as always. She walked to the boarding house, as always. But everything felt different, as if the world had tilted slightly on its axis. Mrs. Garrett noticed immediately. "You're smiling," she said, suspicious. "Why are you smiling? Am I—" Vera touched her face, surprised. "Yes, and it's unnerving. Stop it." But Vera couldn't. The smile kept creeping back, unbidden and strange. Lily noticed too. "Did something happen?" she asked eagerly. "Did you meet someone?" "I might have," Vera said carefully. Lily squealed, "Tell me everything." But Vera shook her head. "Not yet. Maybe not ever." Some things were too fragile to speak aloud, too new to risk breaking with words. She worked through the day, her mind elsewhere. She thought about the land, about Kincaid's offer, about the gathering that night. She had nothing to wear, nothing suitable for a party at a ranch house with white columns and musicians from Denver. The idea of walking into that world, of being seen by those people, made her stomach twist. But another part of her, a part she'd buried years ago, stirred with defiance. She was Laughing Crow's granddaughter. She was Lorraine's daughter. She had survived poverty, loss, and loneliness. She had nothing left to lose, which meant she had everything to gain. By late afternoon, she'd made up her mind. She would go. She went to the dry goods store and used what little credit she had left to buy a length of dark blue fabric, the cheapest they had. She spent the evening in her shed, sewing by candlelight, her fingers clumsy but determined. The dress wouldn't win any prizes, but it was clean and whole, and when she put it on, she looked almost respectable. She braided her hair, pinning it up with her mother's old hairpins. She scrubbed her face and hands until they were raw. She stood in front of the cracked piece of mirror she kept hidden under her cot and stared at her reflection. She didn't look beautiful. She didn't look elegant, but she looked like someone who refused to disappear. That would have to be enough. The Kincaid Ranch sat 5 miles north of Ashton Flats, sprawling across the valley like a small kingdom. Vera walked the distance, unwilling to arrive in the back of some borrowed wagon like cargo. Her feet ached by the time the white columns came into view, glowing in the dusk like pillars of salt. Lanterns hung from the porch, and music drifted across the grass, violin and piano mingling with laughter. She stopped at the edge of the property, suddenly aware of how foolish this was. Women in silk dresses moved past the windows, their jewelry catching the light. Men in tailored suits stood on the lawn, cigars glowing like fireflies. She looked down at her homemade dress, at her worn boots caked with dust from the walk, and felt the old shame creeping back. Then the front door opened, and Kincaid stepped out. He saw her immediately, as if he'd been watching for her. He crossed the lawn in long strides, his expression unreadable until he stopped directly in front of her. "You came," he said simply. "I wasn't sure I would." "I'm glad you did." He offered his arm. "Shall we?" Vera hesitated, then took it. His arm was solid beneath her hand, and as they walked toward the house, she felt the stairs like brands on her skin. Conversations faltered. Heads turned. A woman in green silk whispered behind her fan to the man beside her. "Ignore them," Kincaid murmured. "They're not worth your attention." Easy for you to say. Not as easy as you'd think. Inside, the ranch house was even more intimidating. High ceilings, polished wood floors, paintings in gold frames. A chandelier hung in the entrance hall, dripping with crystal. Vera had never seen anything like it. She felt like she was trespassing in a museum. Kincaid led her through the crowd, nodding to guests, but not stopping. They reached a quieter hallway, and he guided her into a small study lined with books. He closed the door, muffling the noise from the party. "I thought you might need a moment," he said. Vera exhaled, not realizing she'd been holding her breath. "Thank you." The gathering's mostly business. Cattle contracts, land deals, political maneuvering, disguised as conversation. You're not missing much. Then why have it? Because it's expected. Because if I don't play the game, someone else will, and they'll play it worse. He poured 2 glasses of whiskey from a decanter on the desk and handed her one. "To your grandmother." Vera raised the glass. "To Laughing Crow." The whiskey burned going down, but it steadied her. Kincaid leaned against the desk, studying her with those grey eyes. "I meant what I said yesterday," he told her. "The land is yours. I had my lawyer draw up the papers this morning." He pulled a thick envelope from his coat and set it on the desk. "All legal, no conditions. You sign, and it's done." Vera stared at the envelope. "Just like that? Just like that." She picked it up, feeling the weight of it. "And what do you get out of this? Peace of mind. And maybe the chance to do something right, for once." There was a knock at the door. Kincaid's expression darkened slightly. "Come in." A man entered, middle-aged, balding, with a round belly straining against a silk vest. His eyes flicked to Vera with thinly veiled contempt before settling on Kincaid. "Jackson, there you are. Mr. Hargrove needs to speak with you about the water rights dispute. It's urgent. Tell Hargrove I'll be out in a moment, Thaddeus." The man's mouth tightened. "Of course." He glanced at Vera again. "I don't believe we've met, Miss." "Vera Hollis," Kincaid said before she could answer. "Miss Hollis is my guest." Thaddeus's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "Charmed, I'm sure." He left without another word, closing the door a bit harder than necessary. "Who was that?" Vera asked. "Thaddeus Colburn, my business partner, unfortunately. We co-own a lumber mill on the eastern boundary. He's useful, but I don't trust him. He doesn't like me. He doesn't like anyone who doesn't own land or livestock. Don't take it personally." But Vera could see it wasn't that simple. The way Colburn had looked at her, the dismissiveness in his tone, the way he'd emphasized the word guest as if it were an insult. She'd seen that look 1,000 times before. "I should go," she said. "Stay, please, just a little longer." There was something in his voice that made her pause, a vulnerability she hadn't expected. She nodded. They spent the next hour in the study, talking. Kincaid told her about the ranch, the challenges of managing so much land, the constant battles with weather, disease, and neighboring ranchers who resented his success. He spoke about his father, a hard man who'd built the ranch through ruthlessness and never apologized for. He spoke about inheriting that legacy and trying to find a way to honor it without becoming it. Vera, in turn, found herself talking about things she'd never told anyone. Her childhood, the stories her mother used to tell about Laughing Crow, living wild in the mountains, hunting elk and trading furs. The bakery her mother had dreamed of opening, the recipes she'd perfected, the small joys she'd found even in poverty. And the loneliness, the years of being invisible, of feeling like she was already dead, just waiting for her body to catch up. Kincaid listened without interruption, his focus complete. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Your mother was wrong about one thing," he said finally. "What's that?" "You're not nothing. You never were." The sincerity in his voice made her throat tighten. She looked away, blinking hard. Another knock, more insistent this time. The door opened without waiting for permission, and a woman swept in, tall and elegant, with auburn hair piled high, and a dress that probably cost more than Vera made in 5 years. "Jackson, I've been looking everywhere for you." She stopped when she saw Vera, her smile freezing in place. "Oh." I didn't realize you had company. Margaret, Kincaid said, standing. This is Vera Hollis. Vera, Margaret Ashford. Her father owns the bank in town. Margaret's eyes raked over Vera from head to toe, taking in every detail of her homemade dress, her calloused hands, her unfashionable hair. How lovely, she said, her tone suggesting the opposite. Jackson, darling, people are starting to wonder where you've gone. You're the host, after all. I'll be out shortly. Margaret's smile sharpened. Of course. She turned to leave, then paused. Miss Hollis, was it? I don't believe I've seen you at any of the social events before. I don't usually attend them. How refreshing. Most women would do anything for an invitation to Jackson's gatherings. You must be very confident. The words were honeyed poison. Vera met her gaze evenly. I'm here because I was invited. Just like you. Margaret's smile didn't waver, but her eyes went cold. Indeed. She swept out, leaving a trail of expensive perfume. Friend of yours? Vera asked. Used to be? Her father wants to merge our properties through marriage. I've been politely declining for 2 years. She doesn't seem like the type who takes no for an answer. She's not, Kincaid sighed. I should get back to the party. Will you stay? Vera shook her head. I've imposed enough for one night. You haven't imposed at all. He walked her to the door. When will I see you again? I don't know. I need to look at the land, figure out what to do with it. I can show it to you tomorrow, if you'd like. She hesitated, then nodded. Tomorrow. He walked her out through a side door, avoiding the main gathering. They stood on the porch, the cool night air, a relief after the stuffiness inside. The music had grown louder, more raucous, and through the windows Vera could see couples dancing, spinning, in circles of silk and candlelight. Thank you, she said, for tonight, for everything. Don't thank me yet. Kincaid's expression was serious. Once people know about the land transfer, things are going to get complicated. There'll be talk, accusations, jealousy. Some will say you seduced me for it. Others will say I've lost my mind. Let them talk. You say that now. I've survived worse than gossip, Mr. Kincaid. Jackson, he corrected. If we're going to be neighbors, you should use my name. Vera smiled faintly. Jackson, then. He watched her walk away, standing on the porch until she disappeared into the darkness. Vera didn't look back. She walked the 5 miles home in the cool night, her mind racing. The envelope with the deed was tucked inside her dress, pressed against her heart. The next morning, Jackson arrived at her shed just after sunrise, riding a chestnut mare and leading a second horse, a gentle grey gelding. Vera stepped out, shading her eyes against the light. Thought you might need a ride, he said. She'd never ridden much, but she wasn't about to admit it. He helped her mount, his hands steadying at her waist, and they rode north together, following the creek toward the land that was now hers. It was more beautiful than she'd imagined. 40 acres of rolling grassland dotted with cottonwoods, the creek running clear and cold through the center, mountains rising blue and distant to the north. There was a flat area near the water that would be perfect for a house, and higher ground that could be used for livestock or crops. Jackson dismounted and helped her down. They walked the property together, him pointing out boundaries, water sources, the best spots for planting. He spoke with easy knowledge, the kind that came from a lifetime spent working the land. You could build here, he said, gesturing to the flat area. Good drainage, close to water, protected from the north wind by those trees. Or here, if you want a better view. Vera turned in a slow circle, trying to take it all in. I don't know where to start. Start with what you want, not what's practical or profitable. What do you want? She was quiet for a long time, thinking. I want a place where I belong, she said finally, where I don't have to apologize for existing, where I can make something that's mine, then build that. They sat by the creek, boots off, feet in the cold water. Jackson told her about his own struggles when he'd first taken over the ranch, the mistakes he'd made, the lessons he'd learned the hard way. He spoke without arrogance or self-pity, just the plain truth of experience. Why are you helping me? Vera asked. Really? Not the debt, not your guilt. Why? Jackson looked at her, and in the clear morning light she could see the lines of weariness in his face, the weight of years spent living up to other people's expectations. Because you remind me of what it's like to want something real, he said. Everyone around me wants something from me. Land, money, status, connections. But you just want a chance. That's rare and worth protecting. I'm not looking for protection. I know. That's what makes it worth offering. They spent the morning planning. Jackson sketched rough diagrams in the dirt, showing her where to dig a well, how to orient a house for maximum light, what crops grew best in this soil. Vera listened, asked questions, contributed her own ideas. For the first time in years, she felt capable, useful, seen. By noon, they'd decided on a plan. A small house near the creek, a vegetable garden on the southern slope, space for chickens and maybe a cow. Nothing grand, but solid. Sustainable. Hers. I'll send some men to help with the building, Jackson said. We can start next week. I can't pay them. You don't need to. Consider it part of the debt, Jackson Vera. He caught her hand. Let me do this. Please. She looked down at their joined hands, his tanned and strong, hers scarred and work-worn. She should pull away. She should maintain distance, protect herself from the inevitable disappointment. But she didn't. All right, she said. They rode back to town in the late afternoon, dusty and tired but satisfied. Jackson left her at the edge of Ashton Flats, not wanting to fuel more gossip than necessary. But the damage was already done. Vera knew it the moment she walked into the boarding house. Mrs. Garrett's face was stony, and Lily wouldn't meet her eyes. The other girls whispered in corners, their voices rising and falling like wind through grass. Mrs. Garrett pulled her aside. I need to speak with you privately. In the kitchen, with the door closed, the older woman crossed her arms. I heard you were at the Kincaid Ranch last night. I was invited. That's not the point. People are talking. They're saying you've taken up with him, that he's given you land in exchange for... She paused, delicate. Services. That's a lie. Is it? Thaddeus Colburn's wife was at the market this morning, telling anyone who'd listen that Jackson Kincaid has lost his mind over some penniless woman, that he's giving away property like it's nothing. The land belonged to my family. He's returning what was stolen. That's not how people see it. Mrs. Garrett's voice softened slightly. Vera, I'm trying to help you. Men like Kincaid don't give land to women like us without expecting something in return. And even if his intentions are pure, which I doubt, you're ruining your reputation by associating with him. I don't have a reputation to ruin. Everyone has a reputation, and once it's gone, you can't get it back. Vera met her eyes. I've been invisible in this town for years. Nobody cared about my reputation then. They only care now because I might have something they want. Mrs. Garrett sighed. You're making a mistake. Maybe. But it's my mistake to make. She quit the boarding house that afternoon. Mrs. Garrett didn't try to stop her. Vera walked to the dry goods store and quit there too. Mr. Pittman barely looked up from his ledger. "Good riddance," he muttered. "Never trusted you anyway." Vera walked out with her head high, even as her stomach twisted with fear. She had no job, no income, and winter was coming. The land was hers, but she couldn't eat grass and drink creek water. She needed supplies, tools, lumber for building. She needed help. That evening, Jackson came to her shed. He didn't knock, just called her name from outside. She opened the door, and he took one look at her face and knew. "What happened?" she told him. "About Mrs. Garrett, about the gossip, about quitting her jobs." He listened without interruption, his jaw tightening with each word. "I'll talk to them," he said. "I'll make them understand." "No." Vera's voice was firm. "I don't need you to fight my battles. This is my fault. This is their fault for being small-minded and cruel. I won't give them the satisfaction of seeing me broken." Jackson studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right. But you need supplies. Food, at least, until the house is built and you can plant." "I know, so let me help, please. Not as charity, as an investment. You pay me back when you can." She wanted to refuse. Pride demanded it, but practicality won out. "Fine, but I'm keeping a ledger. Every cent gets repaid. Deal." He left and returned an hour later with a wagon full of supplies. Flour, beans, salt pork, coffee, sugar, tools, nails, a good axe, 2 wool blankets and a cast-iron pot. He unloaded it all into her shed, packing it carefully. "This should hold you for a while," he said. "Thank you." He turned to go, then stopped. "Vera, there's something you should know. Thaddeus Colburn is organizing a meeting. Ranchers, landowners, businessmen. He's trying to build opposition to the land transfer. He's claiming I've been coerced, that you're using some kind of influence over me. Let him try. The law is on our side. The law is flexible when rich men want it to be. Then we'll fight. Together." Jackson's expression softened. "Together." He reached for her hand, holding it gently. "Whatever happens, you're not alone in this." Vera looked up at him, at the honesty in his eyes, and felt something shift inside her. Not love, not yet, but the possibility of it. The dangerous, terrifying, exhilarating possibility. "I know," she said. He left, and Vera stood in the doorway of her shed, watching the stars emerge one by one. The night was cold, autumn giving way to the promise of winter. But she didn't feel cold. She felt alive, awake, ready. The fight was coming. She could feel it in the air, in the whispers, in the way people looked at her now. But for the first time in her life, she had something worth fighting for, and she would not lose. The meeting took place 3 days later at the town hall, a squat building that smelled of tobacco and old wood. Vera wasn't invited, but she came anyway, standing at the back with her arms crossed, while 24 men filled the chairs. Thaddeus Colburn stood at the front, his round face flushed with self-importance. Jackson sat near the middle, his expression unreadable. He hadn't told her about the meeting, probably hoping to spare her the ugliness. But Vera had learned about it from the baker's wife, who'd whispered the news with a mixture of pity and anticipation, as if waiting for a hanging. Colburn cleared his throat. "Gentlemen, we're here to discuss a matter that affects all of us. Jackson Kincaid, a man we've respected and done business with for years, has made a decision that threatens the stability of our community." Heads turned toward Jackson. He didn't move. "He's given away 40 acres of prime land," Colburn continued, "to a woman with no experience, no resources, and no legal claim. This sets a dangerous precedent." If we allow sentiment to override sound judgment, what's to stop others from making similar mistakes? A rancher named Samuel Pruitt spoke up, his weathered face skeptical. The land belonged to the woman's grandfather. Seems like Jackson's just correcting an old wrong. Was it wrong? Colburn shot back. Or was it proper compensation for unpaid taxes? The county followed the law. Jackson's father followed the law. Now Jackson wants to rewrite history because some woman told him a sob story. She didn't tell me anything, Jackson said, his voice cutting through the room. Her mother did, in a letter written on her deathbed. A letter that reminded me of a debt my family never paid. Debts expire, Colburn said, especially ones based on savage charity. The word hung in the air like a slap. Vera's hands clenched, but she stayed silent. Watch your mouth, Thaddeus, Jackson said quietly. There was steel beneath the words. I'm simply stating facts. The woman's grandmother was Cheyenne. Her grandfather was a trapper of questionable character. They lived outside the law, outside society. Your father had no obligation to them. My father was a coward who let a woman die rather than admit he owed her. I won't make the same mistake. Then you're a fool. Colburn turned to address the room. Gentlemen, this isn't just about one parcel of land. It's about control. If Jackson can give away property on a whim, what does that say about the rest of us? What does it say about contracts, agreements, the foundation of business? A younger man in the front, clean-shaven and nervous, raised his hand. What do you propose we do? We petition the county to review the transfer. We argue that Jackson acted under duress or diminished capacity. We protect him from himself. Jackson stood, his chair scraping against the floor. I'm standing right here, Thaddeus. I don't need your protection. You need something. You're throwing away your reputation for a woman who'll never fit into your world. Colburn's smile was ugly. Or maybe that's the appeal. Maybe you're tired of refined women who expect you to behave like a gentleman. Jackson moved so fast, Colburn didn't have time to flinch. He grabbed the smaller man by the collar and slammed him against the wall, his forearm pressed across Colburn's throat. Say another word about her, Jackson growled, and I'll break your jaw. The room erupted. Men jumped to their feet, some trying to pull Jackson back, others shouting for order. Vera pushed through the crowd, her heart pounding. Jackson, she called, let him go. He turned his head, saw her, and something in his eyes cooled. He released Colburn, who stumbled forward, gasping and red-faced. You'll regret this, Colburn wheezed. All of you will witness what happens when a man loses his mind over a Vera stepped forward and slapped him across the face. The crack echoed through the sudden silence. Colburn stared at her, shocked, one hand pressed to his reddening cheek. My name is Vera Hollis, she said, her voice steady. I'm the granddaughter of Laughing Crow, who saved Jackson Kincaid's life when she had every reason to let him die. I'm the daughter of Lorraine Hollis, who worked herself to death in this town while men like you looked through her like she was glass. And I own 40 acres of land that your greed can't touch. She turned to face the room. You want to call me savage? Go ahead. You want to call me a schemer? Do it. But I'm not going anywhere, and neither is Jackson. So if you have something to say it to my face. Otherwise, get out of my way. No one spoke. Even Colburn seemed at a loss. Vera took Jackson's hand and walked toward the door. The crowd parted like water. Outside, the evening air was cool and clean. Vera kept walking until they reached the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open grass. Only then did she stop, her hands shaking with delayed reaction. "You didn't have to do that," Jackson said. "Yes, I did." She turned to face him. "They'll never respect me, Jackson. They'll never accept me. But they need to know I won't be intimidated. Colburn will retaliate. He doesn't forget. I don't care." Jackson studied her face in the fading light. "You should. He has connections, lawyers, friends in the territorial government. He can make life very difficult. Then we deal with it. There's another option." His voice was careful. "We could leave. Not Ashton Flats, but this whole territory. Head west. Start over where nobody knows us. Run away, you mean?" "Not running. Choosing." Vera looked back toward the town, at the lights beginning to glow in windows, at the spire of the church rising against the darkening sky. She'd lived here her entire life, suffered here, been forgotten here. The thought of leaving should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt like surrender. "Not yet," she said. "I want to see the house built. I want to stand on land that's mine and know I earned it. Then we can decide." "All right." Jackson's hand tightened around hers. "But if things get dangerous, I've lived with danger my whole life. Poverty's dangerous. Loneliness is dangerous. At least now, I'm choosing my battles." They walked back to her shed in comfortable silence. Jackson didn't leave immediately, lingering in the doorway as if reluctant to go. "Stay," Vera said. It wasn't an invitation she made lightly. "Are you sure?" "No, but I'm tired of being careful." He stayed. They sat by the small stove, sharing coffee and quiet conversation until exhaustion pulled them toward sleep. Vera made a pallet on the floor for him, but sometime in the night she woke to find him watching her from across the small space. "Can't sleep?" she whispered. "Thinking." "About what?" "About how I never expected this. Any of it." He paused. "About how I don't want to lose it." "You won't. You don't know that." "No," she admitted. "But I'm not planning on making it easy." Construction on the house began the following week. Jackson brought 5 men from his ranch, skilled carpenters and masons who worked without question. They dug the foundation, hauled stones from the creek for the walls, cut and shaped timber from the nearby woods. Vera worked alongside them, her muscles screaming, her hands blistering, but her spirit soaring. The frame went up in 4 days, the roof in 3 more. By the end of the 2nd week, the house had walls, windows, a door that locked. It was small, just 2 rooms and a loft, but it was solid, real, hers. Jackson came every day, sometimes to supervise, often just to be near her. They developed a rhythm, working side by side, speaking little but understanding much. In the evenings, they'd sit on the half-finished porch, watching the sun set over the mountains, planning gardens and livestock and futures. It was during one of those evenings that the first warning came. Vera had ridden into town for supplies, leaving Jackson to finish installing the kitchen shelves. She was loading flour and beans into her saddlebags when she noticed the crowd gathered near the sheriff's office. She walked over, curiosity pulling her forward. A notice was posted on the door, official-looking with a territorial seal at the top. Vera pushed through to read it. Notice of claim dispute. The property transfer of Lot 47, Section 12, Township 3 North, Range 8, West, commonly known as the Moreau Parcel, is hereby contested by Thaddeus J. Colburn on grounds of fraudulent conveyance and undue influence. A hearing will be held on October 15th to determine the validity of said transfer. All interested parties are required to attend. Vera's blood turned to ice. She tore the notice down, crumpling it in her fist. "Hey!" the sheriff called from inside his office. "You can't do that." "Watch me," she snapped. shoving the paper into her coat and mounting her horse. She rode hard back to the property, her mind racing. Fraudulent conveyance, undue influence. Colburn was trying to prove Jackson had been tricked or coerced into giving her the land. If he succeeded, she'd lose everything. Jackson was on the porch when she arrived, hammering the last board into place. He looked up, saw her face, and set down his tools. What happened? She handed him the crumpled notice. He read it twice, his expression darkening. "That bastard," he muttered. "He's filed a formal challenge. Can he do that? He can try. Whether he'll succeed is another matter. The deed is legal. We have documentation, witnesses, the original survey maps. But Colburn has money and connections. He can drag this out for months, maybe years." Vera felt her carefully built hope beginning to crack. "I can't afford a long legal battle. You won't have to. I'll pay for the lawyers, cover all the costs." "That's not the point." She gestured at the house, at the land stretching around them. "This was supposed to be mine, earned, not given. If you fight my battles for me, what does that make me? It makes you smart enough to accept help when you need it. Or dependent." Vera's voice was bitter. "Just another woman who needs a man to save her." Jackson caught her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. "You are the least dependent person I've ever met. You've survived things that would have broken most people. Accepting help doesn't make you weak, it makes you human." She wanted to argue, but the fight drained out of her. She leaned against him, letting him hold her weight for a moment. "What if we lose?" she whispered. "We won't. But what if we do?" Jackson was quiet for a long time. "Then we go west. Like I said before, we find new land, build a new house, start again." "I'm so tired of starting again." "I know." They stood there as the sun dipped below the mountains, casting long shadows across the unfinished house. Vera had never felt more vulnerable, more exposed. She'd allowed herself to hope, and now that hope was being weaponized against her. The hearing was set for 3 weeks away. In that time, they finished the house. Vera moved in her few possessions, arranged her mother's journal on a shelf Jackson had built, hung dried herbs from the rafters. Jackson brought furniture from the ranch, pieces he claimed he didn't need, though she suspected he'd bought them specifically for her. They didn't speak about the hearing much. It loomed like a storm cloud, but they chose to ignore it, to focus on the present. Jackson taught her to ride properly, to recognize different tracks and signs in the wilderness. Vera taught him her mother's recipes, filling the house with the smell of bread and stew and pie. At night, they sat by the fire, sometimes talking, sometimes just existing in comfortable silence. Jackson slept in the loft now, the pretense of propriety abandoned. Vera knew the town was talking, knew her reputation, such as it was thoroughly destroyed. She didn't care anymore. One night, 10 days before the hearing, Jackson came to her room. He didn't speak, just stood in the doorway, silhouetted by lamplight. "Vera," he said finally, "if we lose, we won't talk about it. We have to." "No." She sat up, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. "I've spent my whole life preparing for loss. For once, I want to believe something good might last." Jackson crossed the room and knelt beside her bed. "I love you," he said, simply, plainly, without flourish. "I don't know when it happened or how, but it's true. And I need you to know that before the hearing, before whatever happens next." Vera's breath caught. No one had ever said those words to her. No one had ever looked at her the way Jackson was looking at her now, as if she was something precious and rare. "I love you too," she whispered. He kissed her then, gentle at first, then deeper, years of loneliness and longing pouring into that single moment. She pulled him onto the bed, and they made love slowly, carefully, as if memorizing each other against an uncertain future. Afterward, wrapped in blankets and each other, Jackson spoke into the darkness. "Marry me," he said. Vera went still. "What?" "Marry me. Before the hearing. Make it legal, make it real. If Colburn wants to claim undue influence, let him try to argue it when you're my wife. That's not a reason to get married. It's not the only reason." His hand found hers beneath the blanket. "I want to spend my life with you, Vera. I want to build something with you that no one can take away. Not Colburn, not the law, not anyone." Vera stared at the ceiling, her mind spinning. Marriage meant permanence, commitment, vulnerability. It meant trusting that this wouldn't end in abandonment and heartbreak. Every instinct screamed at her to protect herself, to keep distance, to prepare for the inevitable betrayal. But Jackson wasn't Thomas Briggs. He wasn't any of the men who'd looked through her or propositioned her or used her and discarded her. He was something entirely different. "Yes," she said, "I'll marry you." They were wed 2 days later in the small church at the edge of Ashton Flats. The preacher was reluctant until Jackson offered a generous donation. There were no guests, no flowers, no celebration, just the two of them, standing before God and promising forever. Vera wore the blue dress she'd made for the party, now faded and patched. Jackson wore his best suit, slightly rumpled from being pulled from storage. They exchanged simple gold bands Jackson had commissioned from the town blacksmith. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Jackson kissed her with such tenderness that Vera felt tears slip down her cheeks. Outside, the autumn wind had turned bitter. Winter was coming early this year, the mountains already dusted with snow. They rode back to the house together, Vera's horse tied to Jackson's saddle. The hearing was in 8 days. That night, tucked into bed with her new husband, Vera allowed herself to feel something she'd denied for years. Not hope exactly, but its cousin, faith. Faith that maybe, just maybe, the universe wasn't entirely cruel, that maybe she'd earned this small measure of happiness. She fell asleep wrapped in Jackson's arms, listening to his steady heartbeat, memorizing the sound in case she ever needed to remember what safety felt like. 3 days before the hearing, everything fell apart. Vera woke to the smell of smoke. She bolted upright, disoriented, her throat already burning. Through the window, she could see orange light flickering against the darkness. Fire! Jackson was already up, pulling on pants, grabbing buckets. They ran outside to find the newly built barn engulfed in flames, the structure groaning and collapsing in on itself. They hauled water from the creek, throwing bucket after bucket onto the inferno, but it was too late. By the time the fire burned itself out, there was nothing left but charred timber and ash. In the grey light of dawn, Jackson found what he'd been looking for: boot prints in the mud leading to and from the barn, a can of kerosene, half empty, tossed into the grass. Vera stood staring at the ruins, her new dress smudged with soot, her hands blistered from the heat. "Colburn," Jackson said, his voice deadly quiet. "Or someone working for him. It doesn't matter. The message is clear." Vera turned to look at him. "What message?" "That we're not safe here. That they'll destroy everything we build until we leave or give up. Then they've underestimated us." Jackson shook his head. "Vera, this is just the beginning. They burned the barn tonight. Next time it could be the house, or worse. So we fight. How? He gestured at the ruins. We can rebuild this, sure. But how do we defend it? How do we sleep, knowing someone might come in the night? Vera had no answer. She walked to the edge of the property and looked out over the land she'd fought so hard to claim. In the pale morning light, it looked fragile, temporary, like a dream that could vanish with the slightest touch. "Maybe you were right," she said quietly. "Maybe we should leave." Jackson came to stand beside her. "You don't mean that. I mean, I'm tired of fighting for every inch. I mean, I want to build a life, not a fortress." He took her hand. "Then we go. After the hearing, regardless of how it turns out, we pack up and head west. Find land where nobody knows us, where nobody cares about old debts or family names. We start fresh." Vera looked at the house they'd built together, at the garden plot she'd prepared for spring planting, at the view of the mountains she'd grown to love. Leaving felt like defeat, but staying felt like slow death. "All right," she said, "we'll go." The hearing was scheduled for 9 o'clock on a grey October morning. Vera and Jackson rose before dawn, dressing in their best clothes, speaking little. The house felt different now, less like a beginning and more like something already being mourned. They'd spent the previous 2 days packing essentials into trunks, preparing for departure regardless of the outcome. Jackson had hired a lawyer from Helena, a sharp-eyed man named Aldrich Brennan, who'd arrived 3 days earlier to review the case. He'd been cautiously optimistic, citing precedent and territorial law, but his confidence had wavered when he'd seen the list of witnesses Colburn had assembled. Businessmen, ranchers, even the county clerk who'd processed the original tax seizure 30 years ago. "They're going to argue that the debt was satisfied by legal means," Brennan had explained, "that your father's purchase was legitimate, and any moral obligation died with the original parties. It's not a strong argument, but in front of the right judge, it might work." "Then we make sure we have the right judge," Jackson had said. "The judge is Lawrence Pritchard. He's known for being fair, but he's also sensitive to public opinion. If Colburn can make this look like you're being manipulated or acting irrationally, Pritchard might rule against the transfer to protect you from yourself." "Protect me from myself," Jackson had repeated, bitter. "As if I'm a child who can't make his own decisions." Now, as they rode toward town in the pre-dawn darkness, Vera could feel the weight of it all pressing down. The hearing would determine not just ownership of the land, but the validity of everything they'd built together. If they lost, it wouldn't just be property at stake. It would be proof that people like her didn't get to keep good things. They reached Ashton Flats as the sun broke over the eastern hills. The town was already awake, people gathering in clusters, whispering behind their hands. The courthouse stood at the center of town, a 2-story brick building that also served as the land office and jail. A crowd had formed on the steps. Jackson helped Vera down from the wagon. She smoothed her dress, the same blue one she'd worn to the party and later to their wedding, now carefully mended and pressed. Jackson wore a dark suit, his hair slicked back, looking every inch the wealthy rancher he was. Brennan met them at the door, his expression grim. "Colburn's bringing witnesses we didn't know about. The bank manager, the former sheriff, even Margaret Ashford. He's building a narrative that you've been unstable since your father died, that Miss Hollis missus Kincaid, has taken advantage of your grief." "That's absurd," Jackson said. "My father died 6 years ago. Grief doesn't have a timeline." Brennan adjusted his spectacles. "They're going to paint her as the opportunist who seduced you for property. It's ugly, but it might work. Let them try, Vera said quietly. They entered the courtroom, a wood-paneled space that smelled of dust and old paper. Colburn was already seated at the plaintiff's table, flanked by two lawyers in expensive suits. He smiled when he saw them, a cold, triumphant expression that made Vera's stomach turn. Judge Pritchard entered precisely at 9. He was a thin man with grey hair and wire-rimmed glasses, his face carved into permanent lines of skepticism. He sat, arranged his papers, and looked out over the assembled crowd. "This is a hearing to determine the validity of a property transfer," he began. "Not a trial. We're here to establish facts, not assign blame. Mr. Colburn, you may present your case." What followed was 3 hours of systematic character assassination. Colburn's lawyers called witness after witness, each adding to the portrait of Jackson as a man compromised by loneliness and poor judgment. The bank manager testified that Jackson had withdrawn significant sums in recent months, suggesting financial irresponsibility. Margaret Ashford, dressed in mourning black despite no one being dead, spoke tearfully about how Jackson had changed, becoming distant and erratic. "He used to be so steady," she said, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. "But after his father passed, he became withdrawn. I tried to help him, to be there for him, but he pushed everyone away. And then she appeared." Margaret's eyes cut to Vera with poisonous precision. This woman who'd been nothing and no one suddenly had his attention. We all saw it. The way she looked at him, calculated and cold. She knew exactly what she was doing. "Objection," Brennan said. "This is speculation, not testimony." "Sustained," Pritchard said. "Keep to facts, Miss Ashford." But the damage was done. Vera could see it in the faces of the spectators, in the way the judge's expression had shifted ever so slightly. When the former sheriff took the stand, he spoke about Vera's family with thinly veiled contempt. Her grandmother was Cheyenne, living outside the law. Her mother worked as a laundress, barely scraping by. The family had nothing, contributed nothing. When the land was seized for taxes, it was legal and proper. And now, 30 years later, Colburn's lawyer said, pacing before the bench, Mr. Kincaid wants to undo a lawful transaction because of a story told by a desperate woman on her deathbed. A story we have no way to verify, no documentation to support. "We have the deed showing the tax seizure," Brennan countered. "We have records of Jackson Kincaid's father purchasing the land for a fraction of its value. We have testimony that Laughing Crow saved Jackson's life, creating a moral debt that was never satisfied." "Moral debt isn't legal debt," the opposing lawyer shot back. "And even if it were, the statute of limitations expired decades ago." The arguments went back and forth, technical and exhausting. Vera sat rigid in her chair, feeling each word like a blow. Jackson testified, speaking clearly about his grandmother's rescue, about his father's cruelty, about Lorraine's letter. He was calm, authoritative, unshakable. Then Colburn's lawyer produced a document Vera had never seen before. "Mr. Kincaid, is this your signature?" Jackson took the paper, his expression darkening. "Yes, this is a promissory note dated 2 months ago, promising to pay Mrs. Kincaid $50,000 over the next 10 years. Can you explain why you'd need to pay your wife such a sum?" Jackson's jaw tightened. "That's not what it is." "Then what is it?" "It's insurance. In case something happens to me, I wanted to make sure she'd be taken care of." "Or," the lawyer suggested smoothly, "it's evidence of a transaction, payment for services rendered." perhaps even payment for the land itself, making this transfer not a gift but a sale, which would require different documentation and tax implications. That's a deliberate misinterpretation, Brennan objected. Is it? The lawyer turned to the judge. Your Honor, this document suggests that Mr. Kincaid himself sees this relationship as transactional. Combined with the testimony about his altered behavior and Mrs. Kincaid's sudden rise from poverty, I think the picture is clear. Pritchard called a recess. Vera and Jackson stepped outside, Brennan close behind. That promissory note was a mistake, Brennan said. It gives them ammunition. I was trying to protect her, Jackson said, frustrated. I know, but it looks bad. They reconvened an hour later. Brennan called his own witnesses, ranchers who spoke to Jackson's sound judgment, the preacher who'd married them, testifying to their genuine affection. He produced Lorraine's letter, which was read aloud to the court, but Colburn's lawyer was ready. He questioned the letter's authenticity, suggested it could have been forged, pointed out that Lorraine was feverish and possibly delirious when she wrote it. By 4 o'clock, Judge Pritchard looked exhausted. He removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. I'll take this matter under advisement, he said. I'll issue a ruling within 3 days. Until then, the property remains in Mrs. Kincaid's name, but no further improvements or transactions may be made. Court is adjourned. The gavel fell like a death knell. Vera and Jackson walked out into the fading afternoon light, surrounded by hostile stares and whispered commentary. They said nothing until they reached the wagon. 3 days, Jackson said. Then we'll know. Either way, we're leaving, Vera reminded him. Like we agreed. He nodded, but she could see the defeat in his eyes. This hearing had cost him something, stripped away a layer of dignity he'd carried his whole life. For the first time, he looked old. They decided to stay at the house rather than the hotel, unwilling to subject themselves to more scrutiny. The ride back was silent, both lost in their own thoughts. The house, when they arrived, looked small and fragile in the gathering dusk. Jackson made dinner, while Vera changed clothes and tried to wash away the day's ugliness. They ate without appetite, pushing food around their plates. Afterward, Jackson said he needed to check on something at the ranch, a matter that couldn't wait. I'll be back before midnight, he promised. Lock the doors. Vera watched him ride off, a knot of unease forming in her stomach. She told herself it was just anxiety from the hearing, exhaustion from the strain, but the feeling persisted. She spent the evening organizing their packed trunks, trying to decide what to take and what to leave behind. Her mother's journal, definitely. The hairpins, a few cooking pots, everything else felt expendable. She was folding a blanket when she heard horses outside. Multiple horses. Her heart kicked hard. She moved to the window and saw 5 riders surrounding the house, their faces obscured by the darkness. "Jackson?" she called, knowing it wasn't him. The front door exploded inward, kicked off its hinges. 3 men rushed in, rough-dressed and armed. Vera grabbed the fireplace poker, swinging it hard at the nearest one. She connected with his shoulder, and he yelped, stumbling back. But the other 2 were on her before she could swing again. They wrestled the poker away, pinning her arms. She fought, kicking and biting, but they were stronger. "Bring her," one of them said. They dragged her outside. A 4th man sat on horseback, his face illuminated by lantern light. It was Colburn's foreman, a brutal man named Pike, whose reputation preceded him. "Nothing personal," he said to Vera. "Just business. Where's Jackson?" she demanded. "That's not your concern anymore." They bound her wrists with rope and lifted her onto a horse. One of the men mounted behind her, his arm locked around her waist. They rode north, away from town, into the hills. Vera tried to memorize the route, looking for landmarks, but in the darkness everything looked the same. After an hour, they reached an abandoned mining camp, old structures sagging into the earth. They pulled her off the horse and shoved her into a small cabin with a dirt floor and no windows. Pike stood in the doorway, blocking the moonlight. "Your husband's going to withdraw his defense of the property transfer," he said. "He's going to sign a statement saying you manipulated him, that he was confused and grief-stricken. And you're going to disappear. I'll do no such thing. You won't have a choice. By morning, Jackson Kincaid will believe you abandoned him, took the money, and ran. He'll spend the rest of his life thinking he was a fool. He'll never believe that, won't he?" Pike smiled. A desperate woman, suddenly given wealth, suddenly tied to a man she barely knows. Why wouldn't she run when things got difficult? "Because I love him." "Love?" Pike scoffed. "That's what makes this so easy. He'll blame himself for being naive. He'll sign whatever we put in front of him just to make the pain stop." He left, locking the door behind him. Vera heard a bar slide into place. She was alone in the darkness, the smell of decay and rodent droppings thick in the air. She felt along the walls, searching for weakness. The boards were old but solid, nailed tight. She tried the door, throwing her weight against it, but it didn't budge. The rope around her wrists was rough hemp, tied tight enough to cut off circulation. She forced herself to breathe, to think. Jackson would come looking for her. He'd know something was wrong when he returned to the destroyed door, the signs of struggle. But would he find her in time? And what would Colburn's men do to him if he tried? Hours passed. Vera worked at the rope, rubbing it against a nail protruding from the wall. It was slow, painful work. The hemp fibers were stubborn, and her wrists bled where the rough texture scraped skin. But gradually, strand by strand, the rope began to fray. Dawn was breaking when she finally freed. Her hands. She flexed her fingers, wincing at the pain, then returned to examining the cabin. The roof had gaps where shingles had rotted away. If she could reach them, she might be able to squeeze through. She stacked old crates in a corner, climbing carefully. The wood groaned under her weight, but held. She reached up, her fingers finding the gap in the roof. It was narrow, barely wide enough for her shoulders. She pushed, ignoring the splinters digging into her palms, and felt the rotten wood give way. She pulled herself up and through, scraping her ribs on the frame. For a moment she was stuck, unable to move forward or back, panic clawing at her throat. Then she twisted, hard, and something tore, either her dress or her skin, and she was through. She lay on the roof, gasping, bleeding, covered in dirt and debris. The mining camp was quiet. The horses were tied to a post near the largest building. She could see smoke rising from a chimney, Pike and his men probably inside, having breakfast. Vera slid down the backside of the roof and dropped to the ground. Her ankle twisted on landing, pain shooting up her leg. She bit down on a cry and limped toward the tree line. She made it 10 feet before she heard shouting. They'd discovered her escape. She ran, or tried to, her injured ankle making her stumble. The forest was thick with underbrush, branches whipping at her face. Behind her she heard crashing, cursing, the sound of pursuit. A shot rang out. Bark exploded from a tree beside her head. She ducked, changed direction, kept moving. Her lungs burned, her vision blurred with tears and pain. But she pushed forward, driven by pure survival instinct. She burst out of the trees onto a rocky slope. Below, she could see a creek, and beyond it, open land. If she could reach it, she might find help, but the slope was steep, loose with shale. She started down, half running, half sliding. Her feet went out from under her. She fell, tumbling, rocks and gravel tearing at her skin. She hit bottom hard, the impact knocking the air from her lungs. For a moment she couldn't breathe, couldn't move. The world spun. Heavy boots crunched on the shale above. Pike appeared at the top of the slope, his gun drawn. "Stupid woman," he called down. "You just made this harder on yourself." Vera forced herself up, limping toward the creek. She heard Pike descending behind her, taking his time, confident. She reached the water and splashed across, the cold shocking her system. On the far bank, she kept going, not knowing where she was or which direction led to safety. Then she heard it. Hoofbeats, fast and hard. She looked back and saw Jackson riding like fury itself, his horse at full gallop. Behind him, 3 more riders from his ranch. Pike saw them too. He raised his gun, but Jackson was faster. He threw himself from the saddle, tackling Pike before he could fire. They went down in a tangle of limbs and violence. Jackson's fists connected with Pike's face once, twice, 3 times. Pike went limp. The other ranch hands pursued Pike's men back toward the mining camp. Jackson ran to Vera, dropping to his knees beside her. "My God," he breathed, taking in her torn dress, her bloody wrists, her battered face. "What did they do to you?" "Tried to make me disappear," she said. Her voice was raw, barely above a whisper. "To make you think I'd left you. Never." Jackson pulled her against him, his arms trembling. "I would never believe that. How did you find me?" "I came back last night and saw what they'd done. I tracked them to the mining camp, but I had to wait for daylight and reinforcements. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I wasn't there to protect you." "I protected myself." Vera pulled back to look at him. "I got out. I ran. I survived. You did." Pride and pain warred in his expression. "You're the strongest person I know." One of the ranch hands rode up. "Boss, we got 3 of them tied up. The other 2 got away. Take them to the sheriff," Jackson ordered. "Tell him everything. Tell him Colburn ordered this. Colburn will deny it. Then we make sure the men talk, offer them leniency in exchange for testimony." The hand nodded and rode off. Jackson helped Vera onto his horse, mounting behind her. She leaned back against his chest, finally allowing herself to feel the full weight of exhaustion and pain. They rode slowly back toward their land, taking a route that avoided town. Vera's mind drifted, shock setting in. She was aware of Jackson's voice, murmuring reassurances, but the words didn't fully register. When they reached the house, he carried her inside and laid her on their bed. He heated water, cleaned her wounds with gentle hands, bandaged her wrists. She watched him work, seeing the controlled fury in his movements, the way his jaw stayed clenched. "I'm going to destroy him," Jackson said quietly. "Colburn, Pike, everyone involved. I'm going to make sure they pay for this. After we leave." He looked at her. "What? After we leave?" she repeated. "We finish this hearing, we take whatever ruling comes, and then we go. We don't stay here seeking revenge. We don't give them any more power over our lives. Vera, please." Her hand found his. "I'm so tired of fighting, Jackson. I just want peace. I want to wake up somewhere no one knows my name, where we can build something without constantly looking over our shoulders." He was quiet for a long time. Then he nodded. "All right. After we leave." She fell asleep holding his hand, her body finally surrendering to the need for rest. When she woke, it was evening. Jackson sat in a chair beside the bed, watching over her. "The sheriff came by," he said. "Pike and his men are in custody. They're talking, trying to cut deals. Colburn's name keeps coming up. Will they arrest him? Probably not. He'll have some excuse, some plausible deniability, but it'll hurt him. The judge will hear about this. Does it matter? We're leaving anyway. It matters to me." Jackson's voice was hard. "He tried to have you killed, Vera. He doesn't get to walk away clean." Vera sat up slowly, wincing at the pain in her ribs. "Promise me something. Anything. Promise me we won't let hate define us. We leave here, we find new land. We build a life based on what we want, not on what we're running from." Jackson studied her face, seeing the determination beneath the bruises. "How are you this strong?" "I'm not. I'm terrified and hurting and exhausted. But I'm also done being a victim." She reached for his hand. "Help me stand." He did, supporting her weight as she got to her feet. Together, they walked out onto the porch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The mountains stood dark against the light, eternal and unmoved by human drama. 2 more days until the judge's ruling. 2 more days until they could leave all of this behind and start fresh. Vera leaned against Jackson, feeling his strength, and allowed herself to believe that maybe, finally, the worst was behind them. She had no way of knowing that the final battle was yet to come. The judge's ruling came on a cold morning when frost covered everything in white. Vera and Jackson rode into town together, her ribs still wrapped beneath her dress, his knuckles still bruised from the fight with Pike. They'd barely slept, spending the night talking about routes west, about Oregon Territory and California, about places where winter came late and land was cheap. The courthouse was packed. News of Vera's kidnapping had spread through Ashton Flats like wildfire, and public opinion had shifted overnight. People who'd whispered behind their hands now looked at Colburn with open suspicion. Pike's testimony had been damning, naming Colburn as the man who'd ordered the abduction, who'd paid him $500 to make Vera disappear. Judge Pritchard entered looking haggard, as if he'd aged a decade in 3 days. He sat, arranged his papers with deliberate care, and looked out over the silent courtroom. "I've reviewed all testimony and evidence presented," he began. "This case has been complicated by recent criminal activities that are still under investigation. However, my ruling must be based solely on the legal merits of the property transfer itself." Vera felt Jackson's hand tighten around hers. "The original tax seizure of the Moreau property was conducted according to territorial law," Pritchard continued. "Mr. Kincaid's father purchased the land legally at a public auction. However, the testimony regarding Laughing Crow's rescue of the young Jackson Kincaid, combined with the letter from Lorraine Hollis, establishes a moral debt that, while not legally binding, speaks to matters of honor and conscience." Colburn leaned forward, his face eager. "Furthermore," Pritchard said, "the evidence suggests that Jackson Kincaid acted with full mental capacity and clear intent when transferring the property. The promissory note, while unusual, does not invalidate the transfer, but rather demonstrates his desire to provide for his wife's future security." The judge paused, letting the weight settle. "Therefore, I rule in favor of the defendants. The property transfer is valid and legally binding. Mrs. Vera Kincaid is the rightful owner of the disputed land." He brought his gavel down with a sharp crack. Case dismissed. The courtroom erupted. Some people cheered, others grumbled. Colburn's face went purple with rage. His lawyers immediately began arguing for an appeal, but Pritchard shut them down with a look. Mr. Colburn, given the criminal charges pending against you for conspiracy to commit kidnapping, I suggest you focus your legal energies elsewhere. This matter is closed." Vera sat frozen, unable to process it. They'd won. After everything, after the fire and the hearing and the kidnapping, they'd actually won. Jackson pulled her to her feet, his eyes bright. "We did it." "We did," she said, but her voice was distant. The victory felt hollow somehow, tainted by all the ugliness that had surrounded it. They pushed through the crowd and out into the cold morning air. People congratulated them, some sincerely, others with forced politeness. Margaret Ashford stood near her carriage, her face a mask of controlled fury. When Vera's eyes met hers, Margaret turned away sharply and climbed into her carriage without a word. Brennan caught up with them on the courthouse steps. "Congratulations," he said, shaking Jackson's hand. "It was closer than I would have liked, but a win is a win." "What about Colburn?" Jackson asked. "Will he face charges?" "The territorial prosecutor is reviewing Pike's testimony. It's enough for an indictment, but whether they can make it stick is another matter. Colburn has resources and connections. He'll fight." "Let him." Jackson's voice was flat. "We won't be here to see it." Brennan's eyebrows rose. "You're still leaving?" "We are. The land is Vera's, legally and permanently. She can sell it, lease it, hold on to it. But we're going west." The lawyer looked between them, then nodded slowly. "I understand. Sometimes winning the battle isn't enough." He tipped his hat to Vera. "Mrs. Kincaid, it was an honor representing you." They spent the afternoon at the land office, filing the court's decision and updating the property records. The clerk, a nervous young man who'd testified for Colburn, could barely meet their eyes as he processed the paperwork. When he handed Vera the final deed, his hands trembled. "This makes it official," he said. "The property is yours, free and clear." Vera took the document, feeling its weight. All this suffering, all this fighting, for a piece of paper. But it represented more than land. It represented the right to exist, to claim space in the world, to be more than invisible. That night, back at their house, they began serious preparations for departure. Jackson would sell most of his cattle, lease his ranch to a neighboring rancher, and take only what they could carry. Vera packed her few possessions, including the deed she'd fought so hard to earn. "We should leave within the week," Jackson said, reviewing maps by lamplight. "Before the first heavy snow hits the mountains." Vera agreed, but something nagged at her. The house they'd built, the garden plot she'd prepared, the view she'd come to love leaving, it all felt wrong, even though she knew it was necessary. The next morning, something unexpected happened. Sarah Hendricks appeared at their door, a widow who lived on a small farm south of town. She was middle-aged, weathered by work, her hands rough with calluses. "Mrs. Kincaid," she said, holding her hat nervously, "I heard about the ruling. I wanted to congratulate you." "Thank you," Vera said, surprised by the visit. "I also wanted to ask." Sarah hesitated. "If you're selling the land, I'd like to make an offer. Nothing fancy, but I have some savings. I've been looking for property with water rights for years." Vera hadn't seriously considered selling, but the offer sparked something. She invited Sarah in, and they talked for over an hour. Sarah's husband had died 3 years ago, leaving her with 2 young sons and a failing farm. She was smart, determined, and desperate for a fresh start. When Sarah left, Vera stood at the window watching her ride away. Jackson came up behind her. "You're thinking about selling to her?" "I am. She needs this land." really needs it, the way I needed it. And we need the money for our journey west. The land's worth more than she can probably pay. Money isn't the only measure of worth. They discussed it through dinner, weighing options and futures. By the time they went to bed, they'd made a decision. They would sell the land to Sarah for a fair price she could afford, payable over 5 years. It would give Sarah a chance, give them capital for their new start, and ensure the land went to someone who'd care for it. Over the next few days, something shifted in Ashton Flats. Vera noticed it first in small ways, women nodding to her at the market instead of looking away, men tipping their hats. The story of her kidnapping and escape had transformed her in the town's imagination, from opportunist to survivor. Mrs. Garrett came by the house, bringing a basket of preserves. "I was wrong about you," she said bluntly. "I let gossip cloud my judgment. You're stronger than any of us gave you credit for." "Thank you," Vera said, accepting the basket. "That means more than you know. Are you really leaving?" "We are. There's nothing for us here but painful memories." Mrs. Garrett nodded sadly. "I understand. But you should know you've changed things here, made some of us look at ourselves differently." After she left, more visitors came. The preacher, offering a blessing for their journey. The blacksmith, bringing horseshoes he'd forged specifically for long-distance travel. Even Lily from the boarding house, bringing wild flowers and tears. "I'll miss you," Lily said, hugging Vera tight. "You taught me that being proper isn't the same as being good." Each visitor, each small gesture of respect or kindness, chipped away at the bitterness Vera had carried for so long. She was seeing a different side of Ashton Flats, or perhaps people were showing a different side of themselves. Jackson sold his cattle at a fair price to a rancher from the neighboring county. He arranged for his foreman to manage the ranch in his absence, with the option to buy it outright in 2 years. His men were sorry to see him go, but they understood. Some things couldn't be fixed by staying. 5 days after the ruling, Vera and Jackson finalized the sale to Sarah Hendricks. They met at the land office signing papers while Sarah's 2 young sons waited outside, peering through the windows with excited faces. "Take care of this place," Vera said, handing Sarah the deed. "There's good water, good soil, and good memories. Build something beautiful." Sarah's eyes welled with tears. "I will, I promise," she clasped Vera's hands. "Thank you for giving me a chance I never thought I'd have." After Sarah left, Vera stood outside the land office, looking down Main Street. The town that had ignored her for so many years now felt different. Not welcoming exactly, but less hostile, as if her fight had earned her a grudging respect. Jackson came out carrying the sale documents. "Ready?" "Almost. There's one more thing I need to do." They rode out to the cemetery at the edge of town, where Vera's parents were buried beneath their simple wooden crosses. Vera knelt between the graves, pressing her hands into the earth. "We won, Mama," she whispered. "I did what you asked. I found Jackson Kincaid. I asked him what he owed, and he gave me more than land. He gave me a life." She paused, throat tight. "I hope you're proud. I hope grandmother is proud. I hope you both know I'm not invisible anymore." Jackson stood back, giving her space for private goodbye. When Vera finally rose, brushing dirt from her dress, her face was wet with tears, but her expression was peaceful. "I'm ready now," she said. They spent their last night in the house they'd built together. The rooms echoed, empty of furniture they'd sold or given away. They slept on blankets on the floor, wrapped in each other's arms, listening to the wind move through the eaves. In the morning, They loaded their wagon with trunks and supplies. 2 horses were tied to the back, including the grey gelding Jackson had given Vera that first day they'd surveyed the land. The sun was just rising, painting everything gold and pink. People gathered to see them off, more than Vera expected. Mrs. Garrett, Lily, Sarah with her sons, even the preacher. They stood in a loose cluster, watching as Jackson helped Vera onto the wagon seat. "Where will you go?" someone called. "West," Jackson replied. "California, maybe, or Oregon. Somewhere with mild winters and land that doesn't cost blood to claim." "Write to us," Lily said. "Let us know you made it safe." "We will," Vera promised, though she wasn't sure if it was true. Some departures needed to be complete, final, without threads. Trailing back, Jackson took up the reins, clicked his tongue, and the wagon began to roll. Vera looked back at the small crowd, at the town beyond, at the mountains rising in the distance. She'd lived her entire life within sight of those mountains, never imagining she'd leave them. As they reached the edge of town, a single rider blocked their path. Vera's stomach clenched when she recognized Colburn. He sat on his horse, alone for once, his face haggard and grey. Jackson's hand moved toward the rifle beside his seat, but Colburn raised his hands, showing they were empty. "I'm not here to stop you," he said. His voice was hoarse, defeated. "I'm here to say you were right." "About what?" Jackson asked coldly. "About the debt. About honor. About everything." Colburn looked at Vera directly. "My father worked himself to death building his business. When he died, he left me nothing but the expectation to be successful. I've spent my whole life accumulating property, money, respect, but I've never done a single thing that mattered. You," he nodded at Vera, "you survived things that would have destroyed me. And you," he looked at Jackson, "you gave up wealth and status for something real. I'm a fool, and a cruel one. I wanted you to know I know it." Vera studied him, seeing the broken man beneath the expensive suit. She could hold on to anger, nurse the grudge, remind him of the fire and the kidnapping and the systematic cruelty. Or she could do what she'd promised. Jackson refused to let hate define her. "Thank you for saying that," she said simply. Colburn nodded, swallowed hard, and rode away. They watched him go, his shoulders slumped, a man carrying the weight of his own failures. "That was unexpected," Jackson said. "People surprise you sometimes." Vera settled back in the seat, usually for the worse, but occasionally for the better. They traveled north first, skirting the edge of Jackson's ranch property one last time. The land stretched vast and beautiful, cattle dotting the hills like scattered stones. Jackson's foreman, a good man named Curtis, stood at the fence line, watching them pass. He raised his hand in farewell, and Jackson returned the gesture. By midday, they'd reached the fork in the road, where they'd turn west, following the old immigrant trails toward the mountains and whatever lay beyond. Jackson pulled the wagon to a stop, and they sat in silence, looking back the way they'd come. "Regrets?" he asked. "None," Vera said. "You?" "Only that we didn't leave sooner." But as Vera looked back toward Ashton Flats, barely visible in the distance, she realized leaving sooner would have meant missing something important. The fight itself had changed her, transformed her from someone who merely survived into someone who claimed her right to exist fully and openly. The victory wasn't just legal, it was personal, internal, permanent. They pressed on, the wagon wheels crunching over the rocky trail. The mountains loomed ahead, white-capped and imposing. They'd have to cross before winter set in properly, threading through passes that could close with a single storm. That night, they camped beside a creek in a valley Jackson knew from his hunting days. They built a fire, cooked salt pork and beans, and sat watching stars emerge in impossible numbers. The silence was profound, broken only by the creek's murmur and the occasional cry of a nighthawk. "This is what freedom feels like," Vera said quietly. "Not having to watch over your shoulder, not measuring every word, just existing." Jackson pulled her closer. "We're going to build something good. I promise you that." "I know." She looked up at the stars. "My mother used to tell me that Grandmother Laughing Crow believed the stars were the spirits of strong women who'd refused to be broken. When you looked up at night, you were seeing proof that strength outlasts everything else." "Then there are a lot of strong women," Jackson observed. "There are, and now I'm one of them." They slept in the wagon bed, wrapped in blankets, the fire burning low. Vera's last thought before sleep claimed her was that she'd never felt safer, never more at home, than in this temporary camp with nothing but stars overhead and Jackson's steady breathing beside her. They woke to frost and the distant sound of horses. Vera sat up, instantly alert. Jackson was already reaching for his rifle. Through the dawn mist, riders approached, 5 of them, moving with purpose. "Stay in the wagon," Jackson said, climbing down. "Not a chance." Vera grabbed the spare pistol and joined him. The riders emerged from the mist, and Vera's blood ran cold. It wasn't Colburn's men. It was worse. Margaret Ashford rode in the lead, flanked by 4 ranch hands, her face set with grim determination. She pulled her horse to a stop 20 feet away. "Going somewhere, Jackson?" "California," he replied evenly. "What's it to you, Margaret? What's it to me?" Her voice was shrill. "You humiliate me in front of the entire territory, marry a woman beneath you, throw away everything your father built, and you ask, 'What's it to me?'" "I'm sorry you're hurt," Jackson said carefully. "But my choices are my own. Your choices affect everyone connected to you. My father's bank has extended significant credit to your ranch operations. If you abandon those interests, it creates serious problems. Curtis can handle everything. You know that. Curtis is a foreman, not an owner." Margaret's eyes were wild, desperate. "Jackson, please, come back to town. We can fix this. You can have the land, your little charity project, whatever you want. Just don't leave." "Margaret." Jackson's voice was gentle but firm. "I love Vera. That's not going to change. And I'm building a new life with her, far from here. You need to accept that." "I won't." Margaret's hand dropped to her saddle, where Vera saw the gleam of a pistol grip. "If I can't have you, no one will." The ranch hands shifted uneasily, clearly not expecting this level of desperation. One of them, older than the others, spoke. "Up. Miss Ashford, maybe we should head back." "This isn't—" "Shut up," Margaret snapped. She drew the pistol, her hand shaking, pointing it vaguely at Jackson. "Come back with me. Now." Vera stepped forward, placing herself between Margaret and Jackson. "You don't want to do this, don't I?" Margaret's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I've loved him since we were children. I waited years for him to see me, to choose me, and then you appeared, with your sad story and your poverty and your schemes, and he threw everything away." "I didn't scheme," Vera said quietly. "I just survived. The same way you'd survive if your world fell apart, the same way anyone survives. My world is falling apart because of you." "No, because life doesn't follow the script you were promised." Vera took another step closer. I know what it's like to have everything taken away. I know what it's like to be invisible, unwanted, dismissed. But pointing that gun won't change anything. It'll just make you a murderer. Margaret's hand wavered. The pistol dipped, rose, dipped again. Tears streamed down her face. I should have been his wife, she whispered. It should have been me. Maybe once, Jackson said gently. But Margaret, you wanted the idea of me, the ranch, the status, the life you thought you deserved. Vera wanted me, just me. That's the difference. The words broke something in Margaret. She lowered the gun, her whole body sagging. The older ranch hand rode forward and carefully took the weapon from her unresisting hand. Let's get you home, miss, he said kindly. Margaret looked at Jackson one last time. I hope she's worth it. She is, Jackson said, more than worth it. They watched the riders turn and head back toward Ashton Flats. Margaret slumped in her saddle like a woman defeated. When they were out of sight, Vera exhaled shakily. That could have gone very badly. But it didn't. Jackson pulled her close. Nothing's stopping us now. They broke camp quickly, eager to put more distance between themselves and their old life. As they rolled west, climbing into the foothills, Vera looked back one final time. Ashton Flats was invisible now, hidden by distance and terrain. It felt like closing a book, the ending bittersweet but necessary. The path ahead wound through pine forests and rocky passes. It would take weeks to cross the mountains, longer to find the right place to settle. But for the first time in her life, Vera wasn't afraid of the journey. She'd survived worse than mountains and weather. She'd survived men like Colburn, rejection by an entire town, poverty that should have killed her. She'd survived, and in surviving, she'd discovered something more valuable than land or money or respect. She'd discovered her own unbreakable core, the part of her that no one could touch or diminish or destroy. Jackson glanced at her, saw her expression, and smiled. What are you thinking? That I'm ready for whatever comes next. Good. He turned his eyes back to the trail. Because I have a feeling this is just the beginning. The journey took 6 weeks. They crossed mountain passes where snow already gathered in deep drifts, forded rivers swollen with autumn rain, and traveled through forests so dense the sunlight barely penetrated. They saw other travelers heading west, families with children and hope in their eyes, men on horseback searching for gold or land or reinvention. They reached the Sacramento Valley in late November, when the California grasslands were still green from the first rains. The land rolled in gentle waves, dotted with oak trees and crossed by clear streams. It was nothing like Montana. The air was softer, the winters mild, the soil dark and rich. They found a small settlement called Riverside, barely more than a dozen buildings clustered around a crossroads. The town sat at the junction of 2 trading routes, which meant steady traffic, but not the established hierarchy that had made Ashton Flats so suffocating. Here, everyone was new. Everyone was building from scratch. Jackson bought 40 acres on the outskirts for half what the Montana land would have sold for. This time, Vera insisted on being named as co-owner on the deed. No more gifts, no more debts. They were partners in everything. They built a house, smaller than the one they'd left behind, but sturdy, with wide windows that caught the morning light. They built a barn, a chicken coop, a smokehouse. But their real project was something Vera had dreamed about since she was a girl listening to her mother's stories. They were going to open a bakery. The building they chose sat on the main road through town, a former trading post that had gone bankrupt. It had good bones, thick walls, a stone hearth, space for ovens and work tables. Jackson negotiated the purchase while Vera planned the interior, sketching layouts in her journal, calculating costs, dreaming in flour and yeast. They worked through the winter, Jackson building ovens from brick and clay, while Vera experimented with recipes she'd carried in her memory for years. Her mother's cinnamon rolls, dense with butter and sugar. Sourdough bread with a crust that cracked like thunder. Apple pies that made grown men weep. By February, they were ready to open. Vera painted the sign herself, her hand steady as she formed the letters, Hollis and Kincaid Bakery, her name first, his second, equal partners. The first day, 3 customers came. The second day, 5. By the end of the first week, word had spread and they had a line out the door. Vera's bread was like nothing anyone in Riverside had tasted, and her pies sold out before noon. She hired 2 local girls to help with serving, both daughters of farmers struggling to make ends meet. She paid them fairly and taught them to bake, passing on her mother's knowledge the way it had been passed to her. Jackson managed the business side, handling accounts and supplies, negotiating with flour mills and sugar importers. For the first time in her life, Vera had something that was entirely hers, not given, not inherited, but built with her own hands and skill. She'd transformed from invisible woman to business owner, from charity case to employer. The change showed in everything about her, the way she stood, the way she spoke, the confidence that radiated from her like heat from an oven. Spring came early to California, bringing warm winds and wildflowers. The bakery thrived. Vera and Jackson bought 2 milk cows and began making butter and cheese to sell alongside the baked goods. They planted a garden behind their house, vegetables and herbs that Vera used in her cooking. Life was good, better than good. For 6 months, they lived in something approaching peace, working hard but sleeping well, building equity and reputation in equal measure. Then the railroad came to Riverside. The announcement appeared in late summer, posted at the general store and the saloon. The Southern Pacific Railroad was extending a line through the valley, and Riverside had been chosen as a depot location. It meant jobs, growth, money flowing through town like a river. It also meant change. Within weeks, new people flooded in. Railroad workers, land speculators, businessmen from San Francisco looking to establish enterprises ahead of the boom. The town's population doubled, then tripled. New buildings went up almost overnight. Hotels, saloons, a proper bank, a telegraph office. One of the new arrivals was a man named Chester Holbrook, who owned a chain of commercial bakeries in Sacramento and San Francisco. He was short, round, and perpetually sweating, with a handlebar mustache and eyes that calculated profit in every glance. He came into Hollis and Kincaid Bakery on a Thursday morning, sampling everything, asking questions about suppliers and production capacity. Vera was polite but wary, sensing something predatory beneath his friendly demeanor. "Excellent work," he said, wiping crumbs from his mustache. "You've got real talent, Mrs. Kincaid. Your sourdough is the best I've tasted outside of San Francisco." "Thank you," Vera replied, already turning back to her work. "I'd like to make you an offer." Holbrook pulled out a leather notebook. "I'm opening a large-scale bakery here in Riverside to supply the railroad workers. I need someone who understands quality, and I'm prepared to pay well. Name your price." "The bakery isn't for sale. I'm not buying your bakery. I'm offering you a position as head baker in mine. Better equipment, bigger operation, steady salary." You'd be foolish to refuse. Nevertheless, I do. Vera's voice was firm. I didn't build this place to work for someone else. Holbrook's smile didn't waver, but his eyes went cold. That's disappointing. I was hoping we could be partners, but if you won't see a reason, I'll simply have to compete with you. Free country, Vera said. Good luck. He left, and Jackson, who'd been working in the back, came out frowning. That sounded like a threat. It was. Vera wiped flour from her hands. But we've dealt with threats before. Holbrook's bakery opened 2 weeks later, a massive operation occupying an entire city block. He'd brought in professional bakers from Sacramento, installed modern equipment, and undercut every price in town. His bread sold for half what Vera charged, his pies even cheaper. Within a month, Hollis and Kincaid's customer base had been cut in half. The railroad workers, concerned mainly with price and volume, bought from Holbrook. Only the original townspeople, loyal to Vera and Jackson, continued to patronize their shop. Vera refused to lower her prices or compromise on quality. We're not in a race to the bottom, she told Jackson. Our food is better. People who care about quality will pay for it. But what if there aren't enough of those people? Then we adapt. She began offering services. Holbrook didn't custom cakes for weddings and celebrations, specialty breads made to order, cooking classes for housewives wanting to improve their skills. She transformed part of the bakery into a small dining area where people could sit and eat, turning the business into a community gathering place rather than just a shop. It helped, but barely. The railroad's arrival had changed Riverside's character, transforming it from a quiet settlement into a booming town that valued speed and volume over craft and care. Vera felt like she was watching Ashton Flats repeat itself, seeing the same patterns of greed and short-sightedness. Then Holbrook made his real move. He went to the town council, newly formed to manage Riverside's rapid growth, and proposed an ordinance. All commercial bakeries needed to meet certain standards of production and sanitation, which sounded reasonable until you read the details. The standards were designed specifically to shut down small operations like Vera's, while allowing large-scale bakeries like Holbrook's to thrive. The council, dominated by newcomers with financial ties to the railroad and Holbrook, scheduled a vote for the following week. Jackson was ready to fight, to hire lawyers, to challenge the ordinance in court. But Vera had a different idea. The night before the vote, she called a meeting at the bakery. She'd spent days going door to door, talking to the original Riverside residents, the people who'd lived here before the railroad changed everything. She'd invited the farmers who sold her wheat and eggs, the families who'd celebrated birthdays and weddings with her cakes, the girls she'd taught to bake. Over 50 people crowded into the small space, sitting on every available surface, standing in corners. Vera stood behind her work table, Jackson at her side. "Thank you for coming," she began. "I know you're all busy, but we're facing something that affects all of us." She explained the proposed ordinance, breaking down how it would force her bakery to close while protecting Holbrook's operation. "This isn't just about my business," she said. "It's about what kind of town we want, Riverside, to be. Do we want to be a place where big money drives out small businesses, where newcomers make decisions for people who've been here from the start? Or do we want to be a community that values quality, craftsmanship, and the people who actually live here?" A farmer named Tom Henderson stood up. "What can we do about it?" "The council's already made up their minds. Then we change the council's mind, or we change the council." Vera's voice was strong, carrying to every corner of the room. The vote is tomorrow at 7 o'clock. I'm asking all of you to come. Bring your families, your neighbors, anyone who cares about this town. Fill that meeting room so full they can't ignore us. What if they vote for it anyway? Someone asked. Then we fight it every legal way we can. But they need to see that we're not going to quietly disappear. She looked around the room. I've been invisible before. I've been dismissed, mocked, told I didn't matter. I'm not doing that again. And I'm betting you're not either. The room erupted in agreement, people standing, shouting support. Tom Henderson's wife, Anna, pushed her way forward. I'll organize the women, she said. We'll make sure every household knows what's happening. I'll talk to the farmers and ranchers, Tom added. Holbrook's been pressuring us to sell only to him at rock-bottom prices. It's time we pushed back. After the meeting dispersed, Vera and Jackson cleaned up in silence, both exhausted but energized. Jackson finally spoke. You've become quite the organizer. I learned from watching you, and from necessity. She set down a broom and turned to face him. I'm not afraid anymore, Jackson. Not of Holbrook, not of the council, not of losing the bakery. Because even if we lose, I know I fought. I know I mattered. You matter, he said, pulling her close. You've always mattered. The next evening, the town hall meeting room was packed beyond capacity. People stood in the hallways, pressed against walls, craned necks to see through windows. The 5 council members sat at a table in front, looking increasingly uncomfortable as more and more residents filed in. Chester Holbrook sat in the front row, confident and smug, surrounded by his associates. When he saw the crowd, his smile faltered slightly. The council chairman, a railroad lawyer named Mortimer Banks, called the meeting to order. We're here to vote on Ordinance 47 regarding commercial bakery standards, and before we vote, Tom Henderson interrupted, standing. I'd like to speak. Banks frowned. This isn't a public comment period. It is now, Anna Henderson said, standing beside her husband. Unless you want to vote in defiance of half the town. Banks looked at his fellow council members, saw the crowd's mood, and reluctantly nodded. 5 minutes. Tom spoke about how Vera had helped his family during a difficult harvest, providing bread on credit when the bank had refused them a loan. Anna spoke about the baking classes Vera taught, passing on skills that women used to feed their families. One by one, people stood to share stories. Birthday cakes that had made children's eyes light up, wedding cakes that had graced celebrations, bread that had sustained them through hard times. Then Vera stood. She hadn't planned to speak, but the moment demanded it. I came to Riverside 6 months ago with my husband, she began. We came from Montana, where I'd been nobody my entire life. Poor, overlooked, dismissed. I came here hoping to build something that mattered, something I could be proud of. She looked directly at Holbrook. Mr. Holbrook offered me a job at his bakery. Good money, he said. Steady work. But I didn't leave Montana to work for someone else. I left to be someone else. To transform from invisible woman to business owner, from charity case to employer, from victim to victor. This ordinance isn't about sanitation standards. It's about a wealthy man trying to eliminate competition by using the law as a weapon. I've seen this before, powerful people using their influence to crush those with less power. And I'm here to tell you it won't work. Not this time. She turned to address the council directly. You can pass this ordinance. You have the votes. But you'll be showing every person in this room that Riverside is a town where money matters more than community, where newcomers matter more than the people who built this place. Is that the legacy you want? Banks shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Kincaid, we're simply trying to ensure public health and safety. Then enforce existing health codes equally, Vera interrupted. Inspect my bakery monthly. I'll welcome it. But don't pretend this ordinance is about anything other than protecting Mr. Holbrook's profits. Holbrook stood, his face red. This is ridiculous. I've invested substantial capital in this town. I employ 40 people. What does she employ? 2 girls? 3, Vera corrected. And I pay them fairly, teach them skills, treat them with respect. Can your employees say the same? A murmur ran through the crowd. Some of Holbrook's workers were in attendance, and their expressions suggested Vera had struck a nerve. Banks called for order. After much discussion and several attempts to postpone the vote, the council finally had to make a decision. 3 voted in favor of the ordinance, 2 voted against. It passed, but barely. And Banks, reading the room's hostility, added a caveat. However, given the community's concerns, we'll form a committee to review and revise the ordinance before implementation. Representatives from both large and small bakeries will be included. It wasn't the victory Vera had hoped for, but it was something. A delay, a chance to fight another day, recognition that the community's voice mattered. Outside, the crowd celebrated anyway, energized by having made themselves heard. Tom Henderson clapped Jackson on the back. "Your wife's got fire," he said. "We need more like her." "There's only one like her," Jackson replied, pride evident in his voice. Holbrook pushed through the crowd, stopping in front of Vera. His confident smirk was gone, replaced by barely controlled anger. "You've made an enemy tonight," he said quietly. "I've made plenty of enemies," Vera replied. "I'm still here. We'll see how long that lasts." He stalked away. Jackson moved closer to Vera, protective, but she shook her head. "I'm not afraid of him. Maybe you should be. I've been afraid my whole life, Jackson. Of poverty, of being alone, of not mattering. I'm done with fear." She looked around at the people still congratulating each other, energized by their collective action. "This is what I came west for. Not just land or a business, but this. Community, purpose, proof that fighting back matters." Over the next 2 months, the committee met weekly to revise the ordinance. Vera served on it, holding her ground against Holbrook's attempts to slip in provisions that would favor his operation. She learned to read legal language, to spot loopholes, to argue her position with facts and logic. The final ordinance that emerged was fair, actual health and safety standards that applied equally to all bakeries, with no clauses designed to eliminate small businesses. When it passed, Holbrook's face was thunderous, but he couldn't argue against regulations he'd initially claimed were necessary. His bakery continued to operate, but without the protected monopoly he'd sought. Competition forced him to improve quality and moderate prices. More importantly, his political influence in Riverside had been checked. The community had learned it could push back against wealth and power. Spring came again, bringing the completion of the railroad depot and an influx of new permanent residents. But Riverside had established itself as a town that valued community over pure profit, that protected its small businesses alongside larger enterprises. Hollis and Kincaid Bakery thrived. Vera expanded, adding a second oven and hiring 2 more employees. She began supplying bread to the hotels and restaurants that had sprung up to serve railroad travelers, but on her terms, maintaining quality and fair prices. Jackson invested their savings in more land, planting orchards that would produce fruit for years to come. They talked about children, about building something that would last beyond their own lives. One evening in late April, almost exactly a year after they'd arrived in California, Vera stood on the porch of their house, watching the sun set over the valley. The land they owned stretched green and gold in every direction, dotted with young fruit trees that would soon blossom. Jackson came out, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed her one and stood beside her, their shoulders touching. "Regrets?" he asked, echoing his question from so long ago. "Not a single one." She sipped the coffee, letting its warmth spread through her. "Do you? Only that we didn't leave Montana sooner." They were quiet for a moment, comfortable in the silence. Then Vera spoke again. "I got a letter today from Sarah Hendricks. How's she doing?" "Thriving. The crops came in well. Her sons are healthy, and she's already paid off the first year's installment on the land. She says, Ashton Flats is changing. Colburn's influence has waned after the kidnapping scandal. Some of the businessmen who used to follow him have broken away. It's becoming a place where merit matters more than money." "That's good to hear." She asked if we're ever coming back to visit. Vera considered it. "Maybe someday, but not yet." "This is home now." Jackson nodded. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Somewhere in the distance a train whistle sounded, carrying passengers and freight through the valley they now called home. "Your grandmother would be proud," Jackson said quietly, laughing crow. She lived free in the mountains, refusing to bend to anyone's expectations. You're doing the same thing, just in a different way. I hope so. Vera thought about the woman she'd never met, the stories her mother had told, stories of strength and survival, of refusing to disappear even when the world demanded it. I think about her sometimes. About how she saved you when she had every reason not to. About how that single act of kindness created a debt that eventually freed me from invisibility. It's more than that. Jackson turned to face her. "You've freed yourself, Vera. I just helped. Everything you've built, everything you've become, that's you. Your strength, your courage, your refusal to accept what the world said you deserved. We built it together." "Yes," he agreed, "together." Inside the house, Vera's journal sat on a shelf, its pages now filled with recipes and business plans and dreams for the future. The blank pages that had once represented an empty life were now a record of transformation, proof that change was possible even when it seemed impossible. The next morning, Vera woke before dawn, as always. She dressed quietly, kissed Jackson's sleeping form, and walked the half-mile to the bakery. The pre-dawn air was cool and fresh, carrying the scent of grass and distant orange blossoms. She unlocked the bakery door and stepped inside, breathing in the familiar smells of yeast and flour and possibility. She lit the ovens, rolled out dough, shaped loaves with practiced hands. This was her kingdom, small but entirely hers. As she worked, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. From the grain shed in Ashton Flats, where she'd lived in poverty and invisibility, through the fights and fires and courtrooms, across mountains and rivers, to this small bakery in California, where she was known and respected and valued. She'd transformed from nothing to something, from invisible to visible, from victim to victor. And more importantly, she'd done it without losing the parts of herself that mattered: her compassion, her integrity, her refusal to become the kind of person who'd once hurt her. The first customers arrived as the sun rose, drawn by the smell of fresh bread and cinnamon rolls. They greeted Vera by name, asked about her week, treated her with the casual familiarity of equals. No one looked through her. No one dismissed her. She existed, fully and completely, seen and acknowledged. At mid-morning, Jackson arrived with a wagon full of eggs and butter from their farm. He kissed her cheek and helped unload supplies, moving with the easy rhythm of long partnership. They worked side by side, comfortable in their roles, neither master nor servant, but true equals. A young woman came in near noon, thin and threadbare, clutching a few coins. She looked at the prices, and her face fell. "How much can I get with this?" she asked, holding out the coins. Vera recognized herself in that woman's face, saw the hunger and desperation and shame. She could have taken the money and given the woman a single roll, a transaction that followed the rules of business. Instead, she filled a bag with bread, rolls, and a small pie. When the woman protested, Vera waved it away. "Consider it an investment," she said. "Come back when you're on your feet, pay what you can, and if you ever need work, I'm always looking for reliable help." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "Pass it forward someday. That's all I ask." After the woman left, Jackson looked at Vera with that expression of awe he still wore sometimes, as if he couldn't quite believe she was real. "You're going to give away all our profits," he said, but he was smiling. "Not all, just enough to remember where I came from." She returned to her work, hands moving with practiced ease. Besides, kindness is never wasted. Grandmother Laughing Crow taught me that. Even though I never met her, the afternoon passed in a productive rhythm. As closing time approached, Vera stood at the window, watching Riverside's main street bustle with activity. The town had grown, changed, evolved. But at its heart, it was still a community where people knew each other's names, where small businesses could thrive alongside larger enterprises, where a woman who'd once been invisible could build a life that mattered. She thought about Ashton Flats occasionally, wondered about the people she'd left behind. But those thoughts came less frequently now, memories fading like old photographs. Her real life, her true life, was here. Jackson came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Ready to go home?" "Almost. One more thing." She took out her journal and opened it to a blank page. She'd been thinking about this for weeks, planning it carefully. She began to write, "To whoever reads this someday, I was born invisible and spent most of my life that way. Poor, overlooked, dismissed by people who never saw past my circumstances to the person underneath. I could have stayed invisible. I could have accepted what the world told me I deserved. But my mother told me about a debt owed to my grandmother. She told me to find a man named Jackson Kincaid and ask him what he owed. When I finally found the courage to do that, everything changed. Not because he saved me, I saved myself, but because he saw me, truly saw me, and believed I deserved better than invisibility. That gift, being seen, gave me the strength to fight for a life worth living. If you're reading this and you feel invisible, if the world has told you that you don't matter, please know that you do. Your life has value. Your dreams have merit. Your existence deserves acknowledgement. Fight for it. Build something that matters. Refuse to disappear. And when you've won your battle, reach back and help someone else win theirs. The world changes one person at a time, one act of courage at a time, one refusal to accept invisibility at a time. You matter. Never forget that. Vera Hollis Kincaid, Riverside, California, April 1876. She closed the journal and set it back on the shelf, knowing that someday, maybe years from now, someone might read those words and find in them the courage to fight their own battles. Jackson locked the bakery door behind them, and they walked home together through the golden California twilight. Their house waited, warm and welcoming, a testament to everything they'd built and everything they'd become. Vera Hollis Kincaid, once invisible, now seen, once nothing, now something, once a victim, now a victor. And tomorrow, she'd wake up and do it all again, baking bread, serving customers, building community, living fully and visibly in a world that had once tried to erase her. She'd won not just land or a business or respect, she'd won the right to exist, and that, finally, was enough. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.